Nice to see you. Thanks very much for coming today. I hope you've had a good summer. Um, as you know, this session is about teaching with real stories, and I'm going to try and keep it as practical as possible. And the other thing I should say about it is that the activities that you will see are kind of transferable activities. That's to say, you don't necessarily have to use them with the particular text that I'm going to show you. The idea is that you could then use similar activities with other texts that you choose. Okay. We're going to begin just with a little poll, and I just want to find out what kind of stories you use in your teaching. So the poll should have popped up there. And there are three questions really. Do you use stories from personal experience, from literature perhaps, like short stories or extracts of novels, or do you use real stories, newspapers, magazines, online? I guess that's one where a lot of us are familiar with. So let's just see what people say about that. Okay. So we're getting quite a lot on real stories, which is good, because that's the theme of the webinar. We're also getting a lot on stories from personal experience, which is obviously a great thing because students could relate to that, and I'm sure you ask students for their own stories too. But the thing we're getting here is obviously people like teaching with stories, and what I want to do is sort of dig down first a little bit before we get onto the practical side of things, is dig down on why that is. What is the pedagogy of that really? But the first thing we're going to do actually is to begin with a real story. So I'm just going to show you an image and take a look at the image, and I will now read the story to you, the story behind this image. It's a bright Saturday morning in September. A young man is clinging to the face of Half Dome, a sheer 2,000-foot wall of granite in the heart of Yosemite Valley. Most rock climbers take 2 days to climb this face using ropes and carrying around 12 kilos of equipment. But Alex Honnold is no ordinary rock climber. He's what they call a free soloer. That means he climbs with no rope and no equipment, other than a chalk bag for his hands and his rock shoes. For 2¾ hours, Honnold has been in the zone, flawlessly performing one precise athletic move after another, and not once has he hesitated. But less than 100 feet from the summit, he stops. Doubt enters his mind. He's paralyzed. What am I doing here? He says to himself, staring at a greasy bump on the rock face. My foot will never stay on that. Okay. I'm afraid we're going to leave poor Alex there, and we're going to come back to him at the end of the session, towards the end of the session when we looked at some other activities. I've worked with NGL for over 10 years now, National Geographic Learning. And as you probably know, National Geographic's currency is engaging pictures and stories. Stories about different phenomena, stories about people, both ordinary people and extraordinary people, like Alex. And of course, as I did this, as I got involved with their content, I became increasingly interested in the question of narrative. Why is it that we all love a good story? Why does that narrative element kind of resonate with us so strongly? Well, one key, of course, is emotional engagement. Stories are about the human condition, about the problems and the conflicts we face, conflicts with other individuals, with society, perhaps with nature, or even within ourselves. And so what they do is they engage us emotionally, and they engage us also in the sense that they drive us to find meaning in things, or they help us to find meaning in things. And that's something that all human beings, or all of us, are kind of wired to do. It also, as we do that, of course, leads to deeper processing of language. I mean, if we just take the example of Alex Honnold, none of us can actually do the extraordinary things that he can do. But I think we all recognize that particular moment that we just came to in the story, that moment of self-doubt. What am I doing here? Can I really do this thing? Do I feel in some way like an imposter or something? So emotional engagement is one key to this, but narrative provides other key elements that help us to think perhaps more critically. Let's have a look at what they are. Narrative gives us a structure to follow. In its simplest form, that just means a beginning, a middle, and an end. Narrative provides a social context for us. It may be a familiar social context, or it may in fact be something quite culturally different. But even if it's culturally different, there are always sort of elements in it which are relatable enough for us that it gives us something to hang on to. It gives us a framework that we can relate to. It also gives us the ability to absorb detail and see the wider picture at the same time. And we'll see this in an activity that we come to later. But what I mean by this, if you think of it a little bit like a camera you can use to focus in on something. It can take a close-up of something, or it could take a large sort of panoramic picture of a landscape or something like that. What it can't really do, unless you've got a really expensive camera, and I haven't, is do both things at once. But that's something the brain can do, and that's something that happens with pictures, that we absorb detail and the wider picture at the same time. It also gives us the possibility to integrate new things with what we've already learned. And there have been lots of studies about this, and one dating back some years in New Zealand, I think it was done in the 80s with primary school children, showing that without any pre-teaching of vocabulary or without any explanation of vocabulary during a story, students having heard a story, could make 15% vocabulary gains without actually being explicitly taught or explained those words. They just took them almost by osmosis. And of course, you know that probably as a child, that you picked up a lot of things through the stories that you heard in that way. And you perhaps, if you have children, you'll know that too, or teach children, you'll know that too. They sort of pick up things by osmosis. And the last point is that they can provide concrete examples for abstract ideas. A slightly funny example of this was some years ago I saw a scientist who was trying to explain the Higgs boson particle, in the CERN laboratory in Switzerland. And he compared it to Mrs. Thatcher, the former Prime Minister, walking through a room. She was the Higgs boson particle. And as she walked through the room, other particles, other people in this case, were attracted to her. I didn't think it was a very good analogy, actually, but you see the idea. It provides a concrete example for something which might be more difficult to grasp otherwise. Good. So we're going to see how these skills might work for a second language learner who's trying to make sense of new language. But I think you can probably see almost immediately from this list here how they might be relevant to a teacher presenting language, and a teacher who's having to present a class. if you just look at these different areas, the ability to organize, sequence, and show connection between events, to prioritize events, to understand and convey a central idea, these are all parts of narrative intelligence. To recognize different perspectives, the perspective of different characters in a story, and to understand character and human experience generally, if we just translate those into the kind of skills that teachers need, we can see some matchups here. For example, the ability to plan a lesson and present information logically and kind of sequentially. That's that organizing ability. That's following a structure. The ability to prioritize what needs to be learnt, similar to the ability to prioritize events. And lastly, the ability to understand the feelings and motivations of different people in a group. The last thing I'll say, sort of on a theoretical aspect of this, is just a study that I looked at. It was a study that took place in Iran, and it was of a large group of teachers. And the aim of the study was to try to find out, it was of Iranian teachers, quite on the whole not so experienced, but quite newly qualified. And it was trying to find out how successful they were as teachers. And the success was measured according to the students' results, and also according to how positively they viewed their lessons. So whether they enjoyed their lessons effectively. And in the study, there were three groups. There was a group who had majored in translation. So they had a kind of linguistic background. They understood the grammatical workings of the language very well. There was a group who had majored in English literature. So they, importantly, were the ones who had a higher level of narrative intelligence. And there were those with a classic teacher training background. And I think you probably know what I'm going to say, that it was actually the group with the literary background, the ones who had a high level of narrative intelligence, that got the best results, who were considered by their students and by the students' results to be the most effective learners. And this was what the study concluded. I don't really know whether that conclusion is necessarily a good one. I mean, I'm not going to comment here on how teacher training should be done, but what it does kind of confirm for me is something that I'd long thought, which is, why is it that a skill which we so admire in other people, the ability to tell stories, to tell a good story, why is it that ability actually compels us in a way to listen to them? Why is it that that doesn't play a bigger part or a more prominent part in teaching and learning programs? So my thesis really today is that it probably should. And we're now going to look at some activities about, to do with using stories. Okay? So here's the first activity, and I'm going to relate these back to the points that I made earlier. And this first activity is really about having a structure to follow. And it's called the 5 W's and the H. And what it is, it's a technique which is used by journalists when they try to test the effectiveness of their writing, of their news reporting. And the basic idea is that as soon as possible in their report, as early as possible, perhaps in the first paragraph, they should answer these key questions, the 5 W's and the H, for the reader. So what are the 5 W's and the H? Well, you probably imagine. Let's just see if they come up on the next slide. Yes, they do. Good. They're who. Who is this person? Or who are these people? What is going on, or what happened? Where did this take place? When did it take place? Why did this thing happen? Are there reasons given for it? And how? Okay? So I'm now going to actually show you a picture, and I want you to think of these questions. I'm not going to show you the story or the first paragraph of the report behind it. But first of all, I'm just going to show you an image, okay? And I want you to think about those questions. Think about those questions in your mind, okay? Who, what, where do you think? When do you think? Well, that might be more difficult. Why and how? And those two questions, as you'll see in a moment, are quite pertinent here. And here is the picture. Okay, so you've had a little time to look at the picture. Now let's read the text, okay? And I'll show it to you and I'll read it to you at the same time. So in his artwork, created in the summer of 2011 at his Beijing studio, Chinese artist Liu Bolin blends into a background of a supermarket soft drinks display. When his assistants finished painting him in, he seemed to have disappeared. Entitled Plasticizer, the piece expresses Bolin's shock at the discovery of plasticizer in food. Plasticizers are additives generally used to make plastic itself and other food products less rigid. Okay. So students then apply those questions to it, and you can see quickly we've got the who here. There he is. I don't know if I can use my pointer, can I? Yes, good. We've got the who here. The when. Sorry, the where is here. Yes, the when is here. All information given very quickly. The what. Well, the what is this. It's an artwork clearly. The why and the how a little bit more. It's not totally explained. The how is not totally explained. The why is clear. It's a kind of protest or a kind of social comment on the use of plasticizer. So that's an activity you can apply to any news report, and it's quite nice. Not only can you apply it to any reading text or news story, you can also get students to apply it, and that happens in the book. This is an extract from Life, is giving students some kind of framework or guide with which to write their own news stories. So they answer those main points, and then they later elaborate on them later in the story. Okay, good. So that was the first activity. The second activity refers to that point I made earlier about the ability to focus in on detail and also to see the wider picture. And here I want you to do something for me. What I want you to do is to take a pen and paper, if you want to draw, and if you just want to write, then you could simply comment in the box if you want, or you could also write on the piece of paper. I'm going to read you a short story, and this is the setting for the story, Patong Beach in Thailand. And it's a story, a personal story of a doctor, but it's a real story. And as you listen, what I want you to do is to note down or draw. If drawing is your preferred medium, that's absolutely great. If you prefer to write, that's also absolutely great. I want you to note down any images and specific kind of details that stick in your mind. So what are the things that are most vivid for you, if you like? Yeah. Okay, so that's what I'd like you to do as we go. So I'm just going to get the text. And here we go. Okay, you've got the instructions. So you're to draw, if that's what you'd like to do, or you can note down just any details which produce vivid images in your mind, or which kind of stick in your mind. So here's the doctor, and he says, a few years ago, I was in my clinic. It's in Patong, on the island of Phuket in Thailand. Patong is famous for its beach, a long crescent of white sand, a fringe of palm trees, and clear, calm waters. It's very beautiful, but also it gets quite crowded. You can see row after row of sun umbrellas. They look a bit like a field of sunflowers on a busy day at the beach. Anyway, one day, a young man with red hair and very fair skin came to see me in my clinic. He was sweating a lot, and his legs were the colour of his hair, like a lobster. I applied some cream to his sunburnt legs. He winced each time I rubbed it in. Then I wrapped both his legs in bandages from the ankle to the thigh. I told him to stay out of the sun and to take it easy for a few days until the redness had disappeared. Well, the following morning I was walking to work along the street by the beach. It was quite quiet. There were a few kids kicking a football around on the sand, and there was a guy wiping down the sunbeds ready for the day ahead. And as I watched him, suddenly I noticed some bandaged legs sticking out from one of the sunbeds. It was the same man. He was lying stretched out on his back in the full sun with just his swimming costume and his bandages on. It was so crazy, it was almost funny. Okay, so there was the story. Could you just tell me, perhaps in the chat box, he was probably English, I'm afraid, yes. Could you just tell me in the chat box which images you noted down as you were writing the story? What sort of details were vivid for you? Lobster-coloured legs, okay. Good, the long crescent of sand, yes. His pain, someone's put, okay. Yes, him sweating, yes. Good, the colour of his legs, nice. Good. A lot of people with the beach, that's right, the white sand, the palm trees, good. His red hair matching his red legs, that's nice, yeah. Okay, good. Umbrellas like rows of flowers, yes, good. Fantastic. So I don't think anyone there, that's great, I don't think anyone there missed the main point of the story, that some people are just nuts in their passion to get a suntan. So that was the main kind of gist of the story, but as you were listening, you picked up the detail. And I think very often what we kind of do, we have this kind of separation between gist and detail, that we ask students to listen for the main meaning before they then pick up the details. But I think what's quite interesting is the mind doesn't always quite work like that. But quite often you might ask your students just to pick out some details to come back at you after they've listened to something, a story, and rather than focusing on the main message straight away, just ask them this question: what details did they pick out? What was vivid for them? What could they see as they were listening to the story or to reading a story? And the way you can do that is by asking them to draw, but you mustn't insist that people draw, because some people don't like drawing. I particularly could not have rendered these things well in a drawing. It would take too much effort and I'd find it stressful. But ask them simply to note down the ideas, because they could note down the images in words just as well. Okay, good. So that was the second activity. The third one is about social context. And again, this is a real story. It's the story of a man you can see in the picture called John. And the other character you can see in the picture is not a man at all. It's a rabbit. And his name is Barney. And John is a homeless man. He begs on the streets in Ireland. usually on this bridge on the River Liffey, over the main river in Dublin. And because this is about social context, I want to ask you a question first of all. I'd like you to do a little poll. And there's no judgment here at all. There's no judgment here at all. I'm not interested in particularly in what your answer is. I simply want you to reflect on this question. And here is the poll. This is what it's about. That you pass an able-bodied man in his 30s and he's begging on the streets. And which of these things would you probably do? Would you give him money? Would you acknowledge him with a smile or hello, but probably not give him money? Would you simply walk on? Or would you stop and talk to him and try and find out his situation? You're on your way to work, perhaps, or something like that, or on your way home from work, or perhaps going shopping, or that sort of thing. Okay. Good. So the answers are coming up. That's nice. Okay. And we've got the majority doing one or two, probably the second thing, just to acknowledge somebody. Good. Okay. Fine. Good. So that's just to set some social context to this situation. And I'm now going to read you the story. And this is a story. It's a real story. It appeared in the Irish press, and it was a story covered in National Geographic News as well. John Byrne, a 38-year-old homeless man who had lived on the streets of Dublin for the best part of 22 years, was sitting on O'Connell Bridge, which crosses the River Liffey in the centre of Dublin. O'Connell Bridge is a main thoroughfare into the centre of Dublin, and Byrne used it quite often to sit and beg. Beside him was his companion, a rabbit named Barney. Well, as he sat there, an 18-year-old youth passed by, looked down, picked up the rabbit, and tossed it over the bridge into the river. Without hesitation, Byrne jumped into the freezing cold water after it. He managed to grab the rabbit and then hold onto a pillar under the bridge, one of the stays of the bridge, to prevent them both from being swept down the river by the current. One of the onlookers, one of the hundreds of onlookers who saw the incident, called the emergency services to help get Byrne back to land. But it was actually a good 40 minutes before they arrived. In the meantime, Byrne was hung on to the pillar and gave Barney the rabbit the kiss of life and actually managed to save him from dying. In the end, the emergency services brought him safely to shore, to the bank of the river. So that's the story. We've set it up with a little bit of social context for students. And normally what I normally do in a workshop with this, but I can't really do it here because we haven't really got the means to do it. But this is what I think you should do in the class. And I think of all the activities I'm going to show you, this is probably the most effective activity for treating stories, which have different characters. It's to get the students now to retell the story from the perspective of different people in the story. So in this case, this is kind of the instruction that you would give them. So you'd ask the students to work in small groups of 3, and they cover the text, and then they have to retell the story from 3 different perspectives. Not the perspective of the rabbit, I hasten to say, but from the perspective of John Byrne, the homeless man, the beggar, from the perspective of the 18-year-old youth, which is an interesting perspective, and from a perspective of a member of one of the emergency services. So they all retell the story from their point of view. And as they do so, you can see that the detail, the language that came up in the story becomes reinforced. Not only does it do that, it also enables them perhaps to look at something from a different point of view than they might have looked at it anyway. So perhaps if they were somebody who normally walked on past beggars, perhaps if they were giving the perspective from the, telling the story from the perspective of the homeless man himself, maybe they'd think of it a little differently. Telling the story from the perspective of the 18-year-old youth, well, you now have to question what their motivations are and what gave that person. So a student might say something like, well, I was walking along the bridge, and it's a bridge I go along quite often, actually, go over quite often. Sorry, I'm not doing an Irish accent. It's a bridge I go over quite often, and it really annoys me when I see people begging on the street. I just, the guy's perfectly able-bodied. Why can't he go and get a job or something like that? Really, why do you have to sit there? It's no good, really. And this day, I was just in a bad mood. It just got to me, and I don't know what came over me, but I was in a bad mood, like I say, and I just picked up his rabbit and I threw it over the thing. I feel bad about it now, maybe. Well, not that bad. Okay, you get the idea. So that's the kind of persona that a student might take on when telling it from that perspective. Okay, and right at the end of the when they've done that, what I ask them to do is to say what they think would have been a fair punishment for the man, if they thought any punishment for the 18-year-old youth was expected, and what they think should have happened to the homeless man. And then I tell them the answer. In fact, the 18-year-old youth, I think, got 3 months in prison for his action, because it was reported and there was such a public outcry about it. And John Byrne himself was given a kind of good citizen medal or something like that, I think. Good. Okay. So that is the third activity, I think. Good. The fourth activity is what I mentioned before about that ability that stories have to help you integrate the new with what's already been learned. So without any particular explicit pre-teaching of vocabulary, something we all do very often, a good story and a clear context can actually bring the students to the realization of the meaning of a word without, or the meaning of several words without having to do that. A big nod, I should say here, to Mario Rinvolucri, who's a great advocate of him and Alan Maley, great advocates of narrative techniques, and this is an adaptation of one of his ideas. And basically, what's going to happen is this. I don't know if we have any, well, I'll say this in a moment. The basic principle is this. You've got two choices here. Either you tell a story, this is going to be at about kind of A2, B1 level, this story. Either you tell a story in your own language and you insert English words at key places, or you can tell a story in, I've kind of flipped it here, but we'll see that in a moment, or you can tell the story all in English, but giving extra emphasis, so putting great stress on the words that you think may be unknown to the students. So you highlight the words by saying them more loudly or whatever, okay? And the idea is that they're able to work out the meaning of those words from context. So I'm going to tell the story in English, but actually I'm going to put some of the words in a foreign language. And at this point I should say a big apology to anyone who is Greek, because the words I'm going to put them in into the words, yes, you're not supposed to know, are in Greek. Okay? So, and this is the question, yes, can you work out what these words are? So, just looking at the picture, Here we go. This is the story of a man who ξεπέρασε a physical problem in an amazing way. Daniel Kish was tiflos from the age of 1. But he learnt to see by using his glossa and his aftia. From a young age, Daniel made a click with his glossa as he walked. Then he listened for an echo. If the echo was loud, he knew that an object was near. If the echo was not loud, he knew the object was far away. Daniel is now very good at using this technique. He can click his glossa 2 or 3 times every second. He can even ride a bicycle, something that's impossible for most tiflos people. The same technique is used by a nycterida, which only flies at night, and uses it to find its way in the dark. For this reason, people call Daniel the real nycterida man. Okay, so I'm just going to read it again. Okay, I should say that click is the same sound. This is the story of a man who ξεπέρασε a physical problem in an amazing way. Daniel Kish was tiflos from the age of 1, but he learnt to see by using his glossa and his aftia. From a young age, Daniel made a click with his glossa as he walked. Then he listened for an echo. If the echo was loud, he knew an object was near. If the echo was not loud, he knew the object was far away. Daniel is now very good at using this technique. He can click his glossa 2 or 3 times every second. He can even ride a bicycle, something that's impossible for most tiflos people. The same technique is used by a nycterida, which only flies at night and uses it to find its way in the dark. For this reason, people call Daniel the real nycterida man. Does anybody know what his name, who he is? This guy, he's called the real. That man, exactly. Good, good. Okay, so you heard the words. So, and then you go back through it, and we'll ask the students what they were. What did we say? The man who ξεπέρασε a physical problem in an amazing way. It's probably the most difficult word. So, a story of a man who ξεπέρασε. Yes, got rid of, overcame, exactly. He overcame the problem. Yes, he was tiflos. I think most people probably got this from the age of 1. Yeah, he was blind. Good. But he learned to see by using his glossa. Any idea? His mouth, his tongue. Yeah, it's in fact his tongue. Good. And his aftia. More difficult. His tongue and his ears. Great. Yes, that's right. So he made a click with his tongue. Yeah, as he walked. And then he listened for an echo. Okay, I think it's a cognate. It's quite, yeah, an echo. Good. So now he's very good at using this technique, and he can click his glossa 2 or 3 times every second. Yes, good. And the same technique is used by a bat, as we said. Good. So then you'd show them the words or explain the words afterwards, after they've got it. Good. So, as I say, you can do this in 2 ways. You can either do it all in English and then emphasize the words that you want them to. Perhaps you can do it first without emphasizing, and then the second time with emphasizing, and then just see if they can get it from context. Or you can simply tell the story in your own language, inserting the English words that you want them to learn, to pick up. That was how Mario Rinvolucri originally showed the activity. as a way, rather than sort of pre-teaching the words so they get it in context, they're engaged with the story and so on. Okay, good. Where was that? Was that activity number 4, I think? Activity number 5 is kind of, yes, is a kind of collaborative retelling of a story. And I think the best way to do this, I mean, retelling is a fantastic tool in teaching. It's a very useful tool in teaching. And if the story is engaging and interesting to the students, they're very motivated to do it. The reason I've put this slide up here is that it's something you could have done with that other story we were looking at when you were picking out vivid details. So what I suggest, I'm actually going to do it with something else, and I'll show you that in a moment. But what I suggest with this kind of story is that you hold back. So you tell the story, first of all, with the students. You then give them an opportunity to retell it using picture prompts or perhaps word prompts. Some kind of support is needed, probably. And when you tell the story the first time, stop before the punchline. That is, stop before the key moment at the end of the story. So in this case, if you remember, the key moment was when he was walking along. That's fine. You could get up to that point. He was walking along next to the beach, and then he saw, and you would stop there. You would then get half the class to close their ears, and you would tell the punchline to the other half of the class, okay? So that they know what he saw was the man lying on the beach in his swimming costume with his legs still bandaged up. They then retell the story to each other, but only one half knows the punchline, only knows what's going to happen right at the end, knows the kind of kicker of the story. And so they've got a kind of motivation to work through the story together. And when they get to the end, student B, who knows the answer, tells it to student A. Okay? You can do that with real stories. I'm just going to show you one example of how I do this, and it's not with a real story. It's with a joke. So it's just kind of made-up story, I'm afraid. But it works very well as a made-up story. So here we go. And the story is called An Amazing Trick, okay? And I just want you to remember that what the principle of this was that when you got to the punchline, the end, you stopped and only half the students heard the punchline and the other half had to look away or close their ears or whatever, so that they could then retell using these picture prompts, and I'll show you the picture prompts now as we go, until they got to the punchline, and then the other one revealed the punchline to the other. So here is the joke, okay? And here are the characters that they are characters, yes, that are in the joke, or different items in the, can I make this work? Oh, yeah. So we've got here a, oopsie, oh, I can't make this pointer work. So the first picture on the left at the top, oh, here we go, it's moving now. So we've got the, or perhaps Emily will do it for me. I've got it now. Yeah, so a piano, fine. And this is a, any ideas? It's not a mouse. It's worse than that. It's a rat. Good, yeah. Okay. This one, and we'll come back to him in a minute. This is a frog, fine. This is supposed to represent a Hollywood agent, so that's important. So a person who's looking for talent, a person who's looking for talent, yeah. And this, anybody know the name for this? Somebody who can make their ventriloquist. Exactly. It's a person who can speak through a puppet. So they speak but without moving their lips, and their puppet goes blah, 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 and you think that the puppet is speaking. Yeah, you don't see them very often now. Anyway, those are the key features of the story. Are you ready for the story? Here we go. So, an old guy goes into a bar carrying a paper bag. Oh, I really need a drink, he says to the bartender. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I haven't got any money. But I can show you a great trick. The barman looks around and the bar's quiet. And he says, okay, if it's a great trick, why not? And he pours the man a drink. The old guy takes his time over the drink, but when he's finished, he goes over to the piano. And he reaches into the bag, the paper bag, and he pulls out a large frog. And he sits the frog on the piano stool, the seat. And he says to the frog, play. The frog then launches into a beautiful rendition of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. The man goes back to the bar. That's amazing, says the bartender. And he pours the man another drink. How did he do that? How did the frog do that? Ah, says the man, I trained him myself. Now for a sandwich, I'll show you another trick. The bartender thinks, well, the first trick was great. So he goes to the back and he makes the man a large ham sandwich. The guy eats it, the old guy eats it, and then he goes back to the piano. Again, he puts his hand in the paper bag and he pulls out a rat, and he sits the rat on the top of the piano. And he pulls out the frog, and he puts the frog on the stool of the piano. And he says to the frog, play. And he says to the rat, sing. And while the frog is playing music again on the piano, the rat sings a fantastic version of Hey Jude by the Beatles. Well, just as he is there in the middle of this performance, the door opens, and into the bar walks a Hollywood agent. Hey, are these animals yours? He says to the old man. Yep, they are, says the old guy. I'll give you $250,000 for the pair, he says. I'm sorry, says the man, they're not for sale. Okay, says the Hollywood agent, I'll give you $500,000 for the pair. Sorry, I don't think so, says the man. Okay, says the Hollywood agent, I tell you what. How much do you want just for the rat? And the old guy thinks and says, okay, I'd take $1 million, I guess. And the agent writes him a check for $1 million. And he leaves with the rat. When he's gone, the bartender turns to the man and he says, are you crazy? Why didn't you sell the frog? You could have had $2 million. Why didn't you? Okay, are you ready for the punchline? Okay, at this point, you remember, we were going to show the punchline to half the students and not to the other half. Okay, and this is the old man's answer. Oh, he says, I'd never sell the frog. He's far too good a ventriloquist. Ha ha. Good. Good. Glad someone found it funny. Yeah, it doesn't always work. My wife doesn't like it much as a joke. so, okay. So you get the idea. That's like collaborative retelling. And then you wait for the punchline at the end. Good. That wasn't with a real story, but you could do it as with a real story, as we showed with the example with Retelling. Good. As I say, always try and do these things with picture prompts or word prompts because they kind of help. Good. I think we're kind of coming to the end of the sentence here. I was going to give you an example of concrete things, but I think I should probably skip that one. And we should just go back, because I said I would, go back to poor Alex Honnold, who, if you remember, I say poor, he's actually very rich, who we left standing on this cliff edge. And interestingly, it's a good story because it kind of contains some of the key elements of narrative. And always, these are questions you can ask students in stories. What was the key moment in the narrative? If you remember, does anyone remember what the key moment was? What happened? Where we left him? Yeah, it was when he he doubted himself. Exactly. He didn't know where to move. He didn't know how to go on. He just wondered what he was doing. He felt like an imposter. Yeah, exactly. So the question here now is, who is the conflict between in this narrative? Because narratives always have some element of kind of conflict in them, between, whether it's between two people, as I say, or with nature, or in yourself, or yeah, it was clearly within himself. It was his that moment of self-doubt. Good. And the next one, of course, is a question of prediction. What do you think happened next? What would you imagine happened next? He jumped. Yeah, he cried. Yeah, come on, where are the optimists? Yeah, here we go. He'll conquer his fear. Good, yeah. Good. That's exactly what happened. It just passed. Like moments, like a lot of moments of self-doubt do, they pass. And he pulled himself together and he went to the top. And he's since then climbed something else, which is just incredible, without ropes and thingamy. Another face called El Capitan, which people take about 3 or 4 days to climb. He climbed in 4 hours. Just amazing, amazing. So, good. That's it. I hope you found the ideas useful. And this is this is the In Focus blog, where you can see more blogs and articles about various teaching ideas. That's my email, if anyone's interested in contacting me and getting any more information about that kind of thing, or you can ask Emily. A lot of the ideas came from life and came from working with narratives for the Life books, and you'll find a lot more interesting stories in there. And yeah, I hope that was useful. I hope you can use some of those things in your classes. I don't know if anyone has any questions for me or anything they'd like to say. They like the ideas. Good, thanks. Good. Does anyone have any specific questions that they asked about any? All the slides available for download? I think so. I think we can check that with Emily. I don't know. I think, yes, the slides go up on, but certainly the things available to watch.
Yes, sorry. No, the slides will be available. Just come on there.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and the important thing to remember is that a lot of these are like transferable activities, so you can apply these things to other texts. They don't have to be necessarily for the specific text I showed you. Yeah. Long's interaction hypothesis. Sorry, Hamid, I will have to pass on that question because I don't know Long's hypothesis, interaction hypothesis. Probably should. I go away and do some reading now about it. Good. Okay.
All right.
So I've got another question there, which I can't quite see. Can you move that over? Oh, perhaps I can move it over. Thank you. Yeah. How you present words as prompts during retelling. Yeah, usually, I mean, often when I'm doing like retelling activities, to be honest, I just grab little pictures from Google, like Google Images or something. Just, but often just like word prompts during the retelling activity. So for that one, for example, for the joke, you just have some of the key items like piano, frog, like that, and then you just go through it. Let them go through it, retelling, just giving them the keywords. Yeah, enough for them to reformulate. Yeah, what was said. Good. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Paul. It was a really interesting webinar, and I hope you all enjoyed it today. Thank you for coming. Just a few last things to point out before we wrap up here. We will be sending along a certificate of attendance as well as the recording and the slides from this session. If you missed anything or want to review any of the great stories and tips that Paul shared with you today. Oops, sorry, I'm too loud, Gregory. I think this is a pretty strong mic I have here. But thank you all again for joining us, and we hope you can make it to another webinar again soon. We do have 2 webinars the week of on October 9th and 11th, one for teaching young learners about exam preparation, and then one also about global perspectives in teenage classes. So we hope you can join us, and we hope you'd enjoyed this today. As Paul mentioned, please do check out the blog. Paul is a frequent contributor, so you can definitely see more of his ideas and posts there. And then we'd love for you to connect with us on social and be part of our community for teachers of English. So we do have a Facebook page, a LinkedIn, and a YouTube channel. You can get up-to-date announcements, teaching tips, and all things like that. So we hope you can check that out. And last but not least, we do have a survey just to hear your feedback that I'm going to direct you all to. So we'd love for you to take a few minutes to fill that out if you have the time. So thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at ngl.webinars@cengage.com. And thank you again, Paul. This was great. We will have another session this evening. All right. Bye, everyone.
Okay. See you.